السلام عليكم، أهلا وسهلا طلابي الأعزاء. أخباركم إيه؟ يا رب تكونوا بخير. طبعا ويا رب يعني يبلغنا رمضان بإذن الله يعني، ونبقى في أتم صحة. إحنا النهاردة مع بعض في المحاضرة السادسة آه، في مادة الماكرو إيكونومكس. وزي ما قلت لحضراتكم هحاول أشرح لكم الحاجات البيزكس المهمة للجزء الأولاني أو للفاندامنتال بارت للماكرو ايكونومكس. خلينا نبدأ مباشرة. طيب، اتكلمنا المرة اللي فاتت أو التو ليكتشرز اللي قبل كده اتكلمنا فيهم عن الماكرو ايكونومكس. First, we start by economics. What is economics means and why economics is important and how we can use economics to understand different issues from two main perspectives, micro perspective and macro perspective, from individual or from aggregate level. And then we go through more details about macroeconomics and how we can use macroeconomics when we're studying the structure and performance, structure and behavior of overall economy, overall society. And we start by circular diagram flow. What does it mean by circular diagram flow? And we know that now we have the output, which is very important. What we produce equal the income we generate equal the expenditure. Expenditure, there are four types of expenditure. Aggregate the aggregate demand. First, expenditure from household create consumption. Expenditure from private sector create investment. Expenditure from government create government spending. Expenditure from the foreign sector create net export or export minus import, X minus import. So as we can see here, this is the whole image about the structure of the economy. So we have five sectors: household, business sector, government, financial sector, and foreign sector. And we have leakages and injections. Leakages, the cash go outside of the main cycle, saving, tax, and import. Injection, which is cash returned back to the circular flow, inward cash flow, investment, government spending, and export. So again, GDP, or what we produced, the output equal expenditure equal income. So expenditure, the sum of expenditure is the economy. كل اللي احنا صرفناه جوه الايكونومي. الانكم, the sum of incomes paid for factory service. كل الفلوس او كل العوائد اللي عائد على كل واحد he contribute in the production process. واخر حاجه lastly الاوتبوت for what we produce. This is the value added produced in the economy. So what is the GDP? First, we define GDP as last lecture, gross domestic product, is the market value of all final goods and services produced in the economy in a given time period. Here we need to first know is market value for final goods and services, for final within specific place, within a specific time. So the four parts for the definition: market value, final goods and services, specific location, specific country, specific time. So we know, we already mentioned for what is the meaning of market value, a final good and service. So final good, not intermediate good, produced within a specific economy and within a specific time. And we reviewed some statistics about the world GDP in the last year. It was the first starting, the biggest economy, the biggest size of the economy, biggest GDP, highest GDP is United States, and then China, Japan, Germany, and so on. So it's very important when we know what is the GDP to know some classification under the GDP. So first, the first point is domestic. So gross domestic product, إجمالي الناتج المحلي, domestic is related to the location. So it's possible, so GDP, gross domestic product, it's possible to be GNP or GNI. So what is N? National. So what is the difference between GDP and GNP? GDP is about the production produced in a specific location. So that's why we say domestic, in a specific area. So I will say GDP of Egypt. So we aggregate all product produced in Egypt, regardless the nationality of producers. So whoever in Egypt and participate in the production will count it in the GDP. So Egyptian, of course, American people, other Arab people, Sudanian people, Chinese people, whoever living in Egypt and working and produce production, this production include in the GDP. Why? Because we care about the location, gross domestic. But if we are talking about gross national product or gross national income, so here we care about the nationality. So if we are talking about GNP or gross national product of Egypt, so here we mention or we mean about Egyptian people. So whether the Egyptian inside Egypt or outside Egypt, right? So national related to nationality. So the GNI for US. So here we include American people inside US and outside US. But for Arab people working in US, not include in GNI of US. GDP of US, no, just include all people inside the US. So why we are doing that kind of classification? GDP is include all people produced within the country. So if we have a lot of foreigners inside the economy, the GDP will be huge. And if we have some in a specific economy, a lot of people working outside, so the GNI or the GNP will be high because a lot of contribution to production has come from outside. So just to show the number, the ratio of local contributor and foreigner contributor. So the first classification for GDP is GDP and GNP, domestic and national. The second one, nominal and real. Nominal GDP, which is the GDP taking in consideration, we use the current prices in the calculation. So GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced. So market value, so it is the market, the value is come from quantities and the prices. So quantities multiplier prices equal values. So what if, so if we compare over years, this year and the previous one, this year and next year, So how we can know the source of increasing of GDP is come from the price or quantity? So maybe we produced the same amount or less than previous year, but the price currently is higher in this year, higher than before. So the output or the GDP or the nominal GDP will be higher. So we need to adjust the effect of prices. How we can do that? We use real GDP. So real GDP will reflect the real increase in GDP over years. So nominal GDP, it's okay, but it's not possible to use nominal GDP to compare over years. We just use real GDP. Why? Because real GDP isolates the effect of inflation or increasing the prices. So as you can see here, the value, the market value is here. It's come from the quantities and prices. So this is the two sources to increase the value, quantities and prices. But we care about quantities. We care about the productivity. We care about how much we produce, not about the price. Because the price increased, like what happened today when the price increased dramatically. So definitely the nominal GDP in Egypt, or mainly in the most of the countries in the world, in 2022 will be higher than 2001, simply because the prices in this year higher than the previous, regardless of quantity. So for instance, if this is in 2009, 2016, we can see here that the prices in most of the products is higher than the old prices. So the GDP or the total, the summation here is 100, and here is 300, which is mean the GDP, nominal GDP, increased 3 times. But is this reflect the reality? Is this reflect the real situation? Okay, how we can differentiate between it is a price or the quantity? We use constant price. So we will use a fixed price. So both quantities will be multiplier for the base year price, which is the prices of 2009. So this is the new quantities will be multiplier to the old prices. So we have a new market value. These market values over 160, this is the real GDP in 2016. So the economy grows by 60%, not by 300. So this is the second classification of GDP. The first one is domestic and nominal. The second one is real and the first one is domestic and national. The second one is real and nominal. The third one will be at the end of this lecture. So based on nominal GDP and real GDP, we can calculate the GDP deflator, مكمش الأسعار, which shows the ratio between this is the nominal, which is include the price, and this is the real when we adjust the price. So it's possible to know the ratio or how the price increase in that economy. So for instance, is this a price in 2010, 7,000, and the 7,000 is real. So 7,000 over 7,000 times multiplier 100. So the GDP deflator in the base year is 100. The base year, which is the year used to compare to other year. هي السنة الأساسية اللي بنستخدمها compare over a different year. In 2011, nominal GDP increase, yes, but the real GDP increase as well, but lower than what increased in. So in 2011, this is the nominal GDP, and this is the real GDP. So the deflator is 111.3. So that's mean the prices increased by 11.3% in 2011 comparing to 2010, and so on for all years. It's another example, use the same equation. So if we have an example about US economy, measuring the size of the biggest economy worldwide, US economy, over 65 years, from 1950 to 2015. In 1950, the GDP of US was $320 billion. Recently, in 2015, the US economy, nominal GDP of US economy is $17 trillion. What does it mean? That means the GDP increased 55 times during this 65 years. So the US economy, the size of the US economy become much bigger, 55 times. It's a huge amount. But let me ask you a question. Does the prices in 1950 is the same like 2015? Is a hot dog sandwich in 1950 is the same price for the same sandwich in 2015? Of course, no. The price increased dramatically over this year. So imagine when I'm asking you about the price of any snacks you used to put when you are in KG1 and KG2 and grade 1, and compare the price today, can see how the price increased dramatically over you. To avoid the effect of a price, yes, we will use the real GDP, not nominal GDP. It's not possible to use nominal GDP to compare over years. We use just real GDP. So if we do that, so in 1950, the real GDP for the US is $2.2 trillion, and currently is 16 trillion, which is mean the size of the economy increased by 8 times. So the size of the US economy increased actually 8 times. So use nominal 55 times, use real 8 times. So again, the question, does these numbers reflect increase in the standard of living of American citizens? If you remember, economics as a science exists to increase the welfare, to increase the happiness of people, not to make the economy more richer, more bigger. The ultimate goal for the economics is people. So the size of the economy for US increased 8 times. So did this reflected on the standard of living of people? In order to know that, we should use GDP per person or GDP per capita. So what is the GDP per capita or GDP per person? Is the real GDP divided by population. So the size of the whole economy, what we all produced, divided on the number of population, number of citizens in a specific economy. So real GDP per person or per capita tell us the value of goods and service that the average person can enjoy. How much I can enjoy in my economy? So I should look for the GDP per capita in my economy. This is the share, theoretically at least, which I can use or can enjoy it from goods and service. Okay. So returning back to the same example, US economy. So first we use the nominal GDP. Second, we use the real GDP. And now we use real GDP per capita. So in 1950, the GDP per capita in US, $14,000. $14,000. In 2015, $50,000. So imagine that the income, the average GDP per capita is approximately the average income in any economy. متوسط الدخل في الدولة. So the average income 65 years ago was 14,000. And now the average salaries is 50,000. So this is mean that the incomes, the salaries, the average salaries in US increase 4 times during these years. So that's mean the standard of living of American people increased 4 times over the last 65 years. So this is when we use the real GDP per capita. So real GDP per capita for economists, for economics is very important because it reflects the standard of living of people. In the same country, like in US economy, and cross countries, over countries, when we compare the countries to each other. So I'm asking each one, what is the GDP per capita in your economy? What is your GDP per capita in your economy? And then I can compare between their standard of living. So how we can do that? So imagine we have 3 people from 3 different countries, from 3 different income levels. We have someone from United States, which is represent high income country, from Central African Republic, which is represent low income country, and Mexico, which represent middle income country. We have 3 countries and 3 different people, person. Let's imagine that before the real GDP per capita for each countries about 55,000 in US, 17,000 in Mexico, and 600 in Central Africa. So the average incomes, let's say, average incomes in US, 55,000. In Mexico, 18,000. In Central Africa, just 600. This is the real GDP. So how we can use the different level of income, the different level of real GDP per capita to explain the standard of living of people. So if we have basket of all basic foods required. All basic food you need, from chicken, vegetables, fish, fruits, all grocery products you need, and put it in a basket and give 100 for this basket. So in order to buy this basket, you have to pay $100. And this is a price is fixed over countries. So it's equal, the basket in US equal 100, in Mexico equal 100, in Central Africa equal 100, in Egypt equal 100, and everywhere, because it is based on purchasing power parity, as we explained later. But let's now assume that the price is fixed, 100. So the people who lived in Central Africa, who have 600 as an average income, will be able to buy 6 baskets because he have just 600. So in Mexico, when the income is about 18,000, it's possible to buy 178, which is mean 29 times the people in Central Africa. So what about US? The American citizen? Of course, because the GDP per capita, or the average income, is about 55,000 per year. You would be able to buy 545 baskets per year, which is mean 3 times in people, comparing to the other person in Mexico, and 90 times than people in Central Africa. Could you imagine the gap between the standard of living? It's come from the gap between the GDP per capita or the average income. So that's mean American citizens, American people enjoyed their life, they can enjoy their life 3 times than people who lived in Mexico, and 90 times than people who lived in Central Africa. So this is the gap in income, reflect inequality in the GDP distribution over countries. So is it clear now how we can use GDP per capita to compare standard of living in the same country across the countries, like the example of US, and across countries, like the example here between US and Mexico and Central? It's very important index. But someone of you will maybe ask me about, is real GDP per capita a good measure of a standard of living? I will say yes. But income is not everything. GDP per capita not reflect every single improvement in the economy. What about health? What about education? What about happiness? It's not included in the GDP per capita. Yes, but the empirical evidence أو الدراسات التجريبية, applied economic science, applied economic research, found the following fact. How the GDP per capita is strongly associated, is strongly correlated with all of these variables. So here is the GDP per capita and life expectancy, the age of people in the countries, over countries. As you can see here, there's a positive relation, direct positive relation between the GDP and the ages. People of countries have higher incomes, live more than poor people. And this is a fact. People in high income countries lived 80 plus. In low income countries lived 60 plus. Why? Because GDP per capita, or the wealth of economy, will provide better quality of life, will provide better healthcare service, so people will live more. People not lived under depression, looking for more jobs because the income is low, so they're seeking for working more, not enjoying their life, and then this will affect their age through the health condition. So number one, GDP is highly correlated to quality of life. Real GDP per capita and Human Development Index. So what is Human Development Index? This is a complex index, include income, health, and education. That is a human development itself. Strongly correlation between HDI and GDP per capita. High GDP per capita, high HDI, low GDP per capita, low human development. So again, GDP per capita is strongly associated with human development. What else? Life satisfaction. In each year, we have something called World Value Survey, which is the largest surveys on the world. Try to measure, capture different perception of people across the countries. And one of these indicators, life satisfaction. Are you satisfied from your life? Yes or no? Yes is not related to the income, but again, is strongly associated with level of. So Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Canada, Finland, Sweden, Germany, US, Luxembourg, Ireland, UK, France, is people have high level of satisfaction, life satisfaction, and high level of income. While people in Togo, Rwanda, Niger, Congo, and other low, Zimbabwe, and other low-income countries have a low level of life satisfaction. So what does it mean? Again, it confirms the message that yes, income is not everything, GDP per capita is not everything, but it's highly correlated to other factors in the life. Is it possible to argue that GDP per capita is ideal indicator? We don't have ideal indicator in there. It's a good proxy. It's good to use it. But the main issue regarding the GDP per capita is GDP per capita miss the distribution of income. So imagine that I'm saying that specific organization, the salaries, the average salaries per month, 1 million. Per month, 1 million. Yes. But if we know that the general manager earn 90% of this income, and the 10% is for the rest of workers. So here, the average income is misleading, is biased indicator, because it's not reflect the reality, because we have inequality, income inequality. We don't have an equal income distribution. So let's have an example about this issue. So if we have 3 countries have the similar standard of living from the GDP per capita perspective. So we have Nigeria, Pakistan, and Honduras. Nigeria, the GDP per capita is about 4,000, the same for Pakistan, the same for Honduras. But the poverty, or people under poverty line, people earn less than $2 per day, is 80% in Nigeria. 80% of population under poverty line. So what does it mean? That means that high level of income goes for few people. And the majority of population earn very tiny part from these incomes. The situation is much better in Pakistan, but it's still not good, because poverty is 6%. And Honduras much better than Pakistan and Nigeria, because the poverty is lower than Pakistan and Nigeria. So just 33 of their population under poverty line, which means there are more income distribution in Honduras than Pakistan than Nigeria, and Pakistan is better than Nigeria. Okay. So the problem in using GDP per capita is the income distribution, income inequality, and this is a big issue. Maybe we can explain it a lot during this course, maybe in the end of this course. Income inequality. Up till here, again, let me summarize from where we start. Start from the GDP, what we produced. So we produced GDP. This is the outcome. This is the output of the economy. This outcome goes to generate incomes through a cycle diagram flow, or the relations between household and the business sector. And then income turn to be expenditure, consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net export. And then the GDP itself could classify into 3 types or 3 categories: domestic and national, nominal and real, and now potential and action. So what is the potential GDP and actual GDP? Do you remember in microeconomics, when we present how we can show the scarcity through graphs, how we can represent the scarcity of resources? We used a model called Production Prosperity Frontier, or PPF. we have point here, another point here, and point here. So we said all points on the line, on the BBF line, which is the relation between product Y and product Z, we said this is the optimal point because it reflects using all available resources in a best way. While inside the curve, inside the BBF, we said that this point not impossible to achieve, but it means there is a wasting of resources. The outside point not possible in the short term, so unattainable point. As we analyzed the individual behavior, we analyzed the whole economy performance. So how we can measure the whole performance economy? We have a three option, three ways to do that. The first is to compare the performance of specific economy to another one. So we can compare the GDP in Egypt to Turkish GDP, to Tunisian GDP, to Saudi Arabia GDP, whatever. But the point is, when we compare cross countries, each country has a specific characteristic, specific resource abundance. Some countries have poor resources. Some others have abundant in economic resources. The resources available may be different. Some countries like Gulf countries have more natural resources. And some other countries like Egypt, Algeria, Iraq have more human resources. So it's not fair to compare Egyptian economy to economy of Saudi Arabia, because the available resources is not the same. So it's possible. So if this is the first option, which we already used, but it's not the best way. The second way is to compare Egyptian economy to Egyptian economy. So I will compare the current Egyptian economy to previous one, to another previous one over years. So for instance, I will check the GDP of Egyptian economy since 2000 until 2020. So over 20 years, what is the GDP here and here and here and here and here and here until we reach to the GDP? It's the GDP increase. That means we are growing, and it sounds good. If it's not, there's something wrong. Okay, so what if the GDP affected by the condition of each year? So the GDP in 2020 maybe would be lower than the previous one in 2019, simply because 2020 we have COVID-19, we have a pandemic, lockdown. So theoretically speaking, maybe the GDP will be affected. What about 2011, when we have a revolution? What about 2009, when you have global financial crisis? So the GDP in 2009 lower than 2009, 2008, and 2010, because this is the year of crisis. So GDP will be affected about events, shocks happen in each year. So this is the second way. So what is the third way? Best way, and of course this is the hardest way, is to compare each year to each year. How? By compare the potential and actual GDP for each specific year. So for instance, in 2020, in this year, in 2020, I will first measure the potential GDP for Egypt. What is the meaning of potential GDP? This is the maximum production possible to produce in Egypt in 2020 without pushing price up, without hiking inflation. So this is the potential GDP. So what is the maximum production we can produce within these specific resources? Regarding these resources is much bigger or lower than the previous year. I don't care about previous year. I don't care about next year. I'm just caring about this year. So what is the available resources now? We have this amount of human resources. We have this amount of physical resources. So it's possible by these resources to produce maximum this amount, or produce point here on the BBF curve. This is the potential GDP. And then at the end of 2020, we have actual GDP, what we already produced. And then we'll compare what we should produce and what we actually produce. If it's higher, that means we grow faster than we expect. If it's lower, that means we're growing slower than we expect. If it's the same, so we are on the track. We on the BBF curve. So this is simply what is the difference between potential GDP and actual GDP. Okay. So if it's equal, it's okay. If it's lower, that means something wrong in the economy. So we need to return back to the point on the curve. We need to push the economy up. So let's imagine this is the potential, what we expect. In some cases, we are lower, and in some cases, we are up than what we expect. If it's lower, that means this gap is a negative. This gap called output gap. So output gap is negative. If it's positive, output gap would be positive. What is the output gap? The output gap is the difference between potential GDP and actual GDP. If it's possible, that means we are growing more faster. If it's negative, we grow more slower than we expect. So the next question, we can understand that if negative, if the output gap is negative, there's something wrong here, and we need to do corrective action because we are producing here lower than or inside the BBF. So what if we produce this point outside the BBF, or another word, the output gap positive? Is something wrong here? We produce much higher than we expect. Yes, there is a problem here as well. As a negative output gap is a problem, positive output gap is also a problem. Why? So if based on your available resources, you can get in our class B grade. So if you get C, so C is lower than B, then you got a score less than you expect. So you need to return back, studying more to increase your grade from C to B. So this is when B is your potential. What if, so it's clear. What if you got A while your expectation is to get B? We expect that I will earn B, I get A. It's much higher. You should be happy about that performance. For short term, maybe yes. But for overall performance, no. Because if your potential B level and able to get A, you increase your productivity, working more times, studying more times. These studying times, extra studying times, and instead of sleeping, and instead of going outside with your friend. So again, either or. So you rechange your allocation of resources in order to increase studying and reduce the time of playing, sleeping, outing, and so on. After a while, studying too hard, what we expect? You will be tired, exhausted, depressed, not feeling good. So here is studying. Of course, studying is important. Yes, but not too much study. So yes, you get A, but still your body is tired, exhausted, depressed. So overall condition, I'm not happy about A grade or A level because I care about you. So to keep balance in your life is the best way to increase your quality of life. Studying is important, but not everything. Playing is important, but not everything. The same for economy. We need to increase the productivity, but not too much. What you expect from your laptop, if you have a normal laptop, just to open the laptop and do a regular process through a normal application like Chrome, Office, Windows, and so on. And you use laptop for playing game. Too much playing using your normal laptop is not for gaming laptop. This is a normal laptop. You hear your van, and then what happened? Your laptop will shut down, switched off. Why? Because if not happen, burn your processor. So that's what we call it economy, overheating economy. So when the economy working very hard, too much, more than we expect, the pushing on the economy. So this will push the price up, and this will create more inflation and will make economy overheating. That means the economy is working or growing too fast than we expect. So we should slow down that growing. So what we are doing in macroeconomics, macroeconomic policies. If you remember, we have 3 types of economic policies. We have fiscal policy, monetary policy, and trade policy. 3 policies try to manage this business cycle between ups and downs. If the economy is the output negative, we try to use economic policies push the economy up. And if the output gap positive, we will try to use economic policies to push economy down. And this is a game of economic policies between pushing up and pushing down. So this is here the output gap in the United States. So mainly most of the time the positive output gap is negative, is lower than the potential, and except few years here, the first years of Bill Clinton, the last years of George Bush, and it's increased, the gap increased dramatically. If you can check, this is in 2009, after the financial crisis, global financial crisis. During the Obama administrative tried to eliminate this gap, and you can see this is the gap here is about more than 7%, turned to be less than 1%. So economic policies on that time tried to push the economy up, tried to reduce the amount of negative output gap. Yes, so output gap is different between how much we're growing or how much we should grow. The output is positive. When it's positive, that means we are growing too fast or overheating. If it's negative output gap, that we are growing slower than what we would like to be. So last, what we expect while the gap is positive, like here, growing too fast. So the GDP growth would be high, employment high, inflation as well high. So inflation, employment, growth would be high. If the gap is negative, GDP growth low, employment low, prices also. So everything is leaving: growth, employment, prices, or inflation. When we are above the potential, everything is high: growth, employment, prices. Prices, we call prices when the prices increase in a consistent rate. This is the inflation. And we never used the term employment. We use unemployment. We know later why we use unemployment than employment. So when we are expect positive output gap, inflation is high and unemployment is low. All people are participated in the production in a very effective way. So unemployment is very low, while we produce too much. So the aggregate demand increase, as you know from microeconomics, when the demand increase, price increase. So people working more, earning more, asking more product, prices increase. Producing more need more resources. So more resources, more aggregate demand increase, prices increase. So inflation increase, unemployment decrease. The opposite, when we have lower, actually GDP lower than potential. Slowly economy, that means no one working, unemployment high, and we have a recession in the economy or going to recession. So prices is very low. There's no one work. So stocks is enough or excess than we are looking for. So we have excess supply. So output negative excess supply, output positive excess demand. This push price up and this push price down. And here, this is the relation between inflation and unemployment. There's pure opposite or inverse relation between unemployment and inflation. التضخم والبطالة. So the policymaker should choose, at least in the short term, between inflation and unemployment. They need more inflation. Why do we need more inflation? Because they push the economy up. So we recruit more resources. So inflation will increase. So unemployment will be low. No, we don't need inflation because inflation will lead to the cost of living. Cost of living, when it increases, that means will lead to political instability. No. We don't need to increase the standard of living. We need to keep the prices under control. So that means you sacrifice by unemployment, unemployment will increase. And this is what happened in Egypt. During early or the end of 19th last century and starting in the first century, the government was target price control. So the price, the cost of living, were fixed, but unemployment on that time high. After 2004, with Dr. Ahmed Nazif government, they tried to accelerate the economic growth in Egypt, and the economic growth reached from 2 or 3 or maybe maximum 4 during the previous time. It reached more than 7.5 economic growth. So more economic growth, more aggregate demand, more inflation, and less unemployment. So this is a trade-off or the opportunity cost between inflation and unemployment. Keep balance and to compromise between them. This is the best way when we are talking about managing economic resources and economic policies. So this is a business cycle and the difference between potential GDP and actual GDP. So again, the end of this lecture, we covered the GDP as a concept, the different classification of GDP, domestic and national, nominal and real, potential and actually, and the importance of using GDP per capita and how GDP per capita real GDP per capita reflect or can use GDP per capita as a good proxy to reflect the standard of living of people, either inside the country or cross countries. شكرا لحضراتكم، وأتمنى أن أشوفكم دايما على خير، وإن شاء الله نشوف بعض في المحاضرة. شكرا جزيلا.